Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana. Hello, I'm Monty Wallace, and it's my honor today to bring you 30 minutes with a legendary Montana broadcaster, Mr. Vic Miller. Vic, welcome.
Well, thank you. I don't think I'm legendary so much as I've managed to outlive all my critics.
So far it's worked.
Right.
Well, you're a native of White Sulphur Springs, Montana. You spent your entire career in Montana broadcasting, and you know, I think all of us consider you a pioneer in broadcasting in this state. You were inducted into the Montana Broadcasters Hall of Fame in 1998, and you've been a trustee of the Greater Montana Foundation since 2000. How in the world did a young guy from White Sulphur Springs get into broadcasting?
I was in high school, and one of our teachers, you know, you're wandering around in high school, don't have a clue as to what you want to be. You know, a number of things you don't want to be. And one day he said, "You've got a good voice. You should consider being a radio broadcaster."
Good pipes.
Yeah. So, you know, I checked it out. It didn't involve a lot of heavy lifting, and so I thought, well, maybe I should pursue this. So after I got out of high school, I went to Seattle and went to a radio school there and studied announcing and engineering, because at that time you have to have a first-class engineering license for most radio stations, because you had to ding around, take readings of the transmitter, and the FCC in their infinite wisdom at the time thought it would be a great idea if everybody had a license. So I did that, got done with school, got my second class, but didn't get my first class license. I failed that part of it. So I came back to White Sulphur and worked for Montana Power for a while as a ground man. And so you'd send stuff up the poles to the guy that was actually doing the hard work. And I was rolling along pretty happy, but unfortunately they had the Korean misunderstanding about that time.
Oh.
And this, Moore County is a rural county, and so almost everybody else had a farm deferment. But I was 1A, and they started off age 26 with the first call. I went in the second call, and I was 19 years old. So it was rather sparse 1A pool. So I spent a couple of years in the Army.
And you survived?
And I survived, and was in the Signal Corps, and was in Georgia for about 10 months, Philippines for about 10 months, and taught classes down in Georgia in radio repair. And when I was in the Philippines, I was in a field where nobody knew what they were doing, including me. So, but I killed time, and my 2 years were up, and I got out.
Did you ever get that first class license?
Yep.
You did?
Yep, I did when I got out, and so I decided I'd send a letter to every radio station in the state. And I got about 3 replies, and one of them was from KOOK in Billings. And the reason they had some openings is they were going to put the television station on the air in November of '53. And some of the people were moving over into television, so they had some openings in radio. So I came down, and they hired me.
So what shift did you work at Cook Radio?
I worked 4 in the afternoon till 12:30, 6 days a week. Had Mondays off, which was really thrilling when you're single and you're 22, and everybody else has gone out and partied over the weekend, and they don't want to do anything on Monday. And here I am, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and no place to go.
And that was the starting shift at Cook Radio back then? That's where they put all the rookies?
Yep. Yep.
Did you ever make it to the famous morning drive shift?
Well, I did. Actually, in '58, there was an opening in the morning. And so
Miller in the morning.
Miller in the morning.
Great ring to it.
So I told them I wanted to do the morning thing, because I was married by that time. And they said, okay, but we'll have to find somebody to take your place. So we listened to a bunch of tapes, came in. Cliff Ewing was operations director at the time. We were down the South Billings Boulevard. Listened to a number of tapes, listened to one that sounded pretty good. And I said, I think he'll do. It happened to be Dan Miller.
One of another legendary Montana
right.
broadcaster.
So he came in, took my night shift in '58, and I went to days.
Wow. So you started in radio in about 53 and you moved over to television in 59, roughly. Tell us about that transition. How did you go from radio to TV?
I was on radio during that period, and suddenly you wake up one day and you realize you've said about everything there is to say and played about everything there is to play music-wise. And so you think, well, I'd like to try something new. So I went in and talked to Joe Sample, who owned the stations at the time, and told him I'd like to go into television. So he said, okay. So he let me shift from radio to TV, and it was quite a transition. For a while, you have a tendency to get so camera conscious, you'd forget to put your mic on. And the two basically go hand in hand if you're going to do a commercial.
Audio and video.
Oh, and it was wild in those days because all the commercials they did were live. There was no videotape. You went out there, you had a script taped to the bottom of a camera, and went out and did the best you could. And if the wheels fell off, the wheels fell off, and everybody out there knew it.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute. Back in the day, no videotape.
Nope.
News was done live, every minute of it. Commercials were done live. How did that work, or did it always work?
It didn't always work, but fortunately, nobody had anything to compare it to. You know, when television first came on the air, it was rather interesting. A black and white television set, and that's all there was black and white color television that made the scene nationally. A black and white TV set cost about $300. At the time, I was making $330 gross as a radio announcer.
And doing well.
Yes, but that was a lot of money in those days. And people would watch anything. We put a test pattern on the air probably in late October or mid-October of '53. And people would be mesmerized by watching the test pattern.
I spent many hours watching it.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was, my gosh. And then we'd have programs like, free programs like how to decorate with cork, you know, and stuff like that. And people would think, my gosh, that's wonderful.
Well, I remember great programming that everybody watched in this community. Yours Sincerely, Billy, was a cooking show that was on every afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
Kachera Polka Party. You know, it's amazing that half-hour shows were done on a regular basis live.
Yep.
And everybody watched them.
Oh, yeah. Because it was brand new until KTVQ went on the air in November of '53. A lot of folks in this area had never seen television before. And so it was a brand new experience, and it was really something else. Although, you know, there weren't an awful lot of television sets out there. And when Cook TV went on the air, there was no guarantee that it was going to work in a market this small, because that had not been the general rule across the country. It was always bigger markets. And television a lot more expensive, equipment-wise, as you well know from being general manager of KTVQ for so many years. And you had this big expense up front and no guarantee of income coming in. So for a while, the radio station contributed a lot of the money that made the television station work, because in the closing days of radio, and I was there, was still a very successful operation. They still had network, CBS network programming, and we had a lot of advertisers.
So radio was supporting TV at the
For a
beginning,
short period of time.
And later on, television came
Supported
into its
radio.
own and supported radio.
Yeah.
Well, I remember as a young kid, we were one of the first families in our neighborhood to have a black and white television set, and the neighbors used to just drop in on occasion to watch TV, normally around dinner time, which I thought was interesting. But that's what happened, and it slowly grew from there.
Well, having a television set was kind of a prestigious thing. They used to have a joke that some people wouldn't buy a television set, they just buy an outside antenna and put it on the roof so people would think they had a television set.
Added to the prestige.
Elevated their prestige in the neighborhood.
Oh, wow. Things have changed, haven't they?
Oh, yes.
Well, I remember some of the commercials that were produced live that were really interesting. I remember one day, and I'm not sure if you were the guy doing the commercial, but it was for a pizza company.
Oh, yeah.
And they tipped up the pizza box and said, "Look how good this pizza is," and it just slid right off the box.
Landed on the floor.
It did.
I think the guy's name was Ron George, as I recall, who was a former Billings Mustang player.
Wow.
And opened up the first pizza place. And that was a disaster. The biggest disaster I can ever recall in television locally here is we had a guy named Hal Deitman, a very prestigious artist who worked for us as a production manager for a while. And he'd build these elaborate sets. And we had this Parisian street scene with the tables and the pillars, and it was nice. But we had the cardboard pillars. And we had two guys doing the commercial. One was Jack Dunhaver, and the other was a guy named Armand Noble. And of course, it was live, no videotape then. So Armand was sitting at the table as a customer, and we were selling, I think it was Medigold orange juice at the time. And Jack walked in and said, "Monsieur, would you care for some orange juice?" And just then his elbow hit the pillar, and the whole set came crashing down. And Armand is sitting there with his deer in the headlights look, and he kind of nodded. Jack took the thing, poured it, drank it himself, and we went black. And Jack was known to imbibe a little bit, so it was probably a natural instinct on his part.
Well, he saved the day, didn't he?
He did. He was the ultimate professional. He had a voice like Don Amici. But it was just chaos at the time.
Oh. Well, if we could only have videotape of some of those things today, wouldn't that be great if we could look back and see those? But unfortunately, no videotape.
No videotape. That was probably the biggest change that I can recall in television, even more than when we went color, because videotape allowed you to make a commercial, and if there was a mistake, you could do it over again. Before that, what you saw is what you got, and it wasn't always pretty.
Well, Vic, you've had just about every job in a radio and television station over the years. What was your favorite? What did you really enjoy doing?
I enjoyed anchoring and doing sports. Although there aren't too many things that I didn't enjoy. There were parts of I was general manager for 18 years, and as you very well know, having held that job, there are parts of that aren't too happy at times, simply because you have to make X number of dollars to make the whole thing work.
The old bottom line.
It is. And then personnel. You know, basically, you're dealing with young people who are anxious to move on and be the next Walter Cronkite or Barbara Walters or whoever it might be. And after being with you a couple of years, they're either going to move on to a bigger market or they're going to find another profession. And so you have this constant turnover for the most part. And we've been fortunate over the years, and we've really been able to hang on to a lot of people at the television station. Like when we are taping this, you know, we've got Jay Cohen, who's a Billings man, grew up here. Scotty, our sportscaster, who grew up here. Bob McGuire, who was here, went back to Seattle, found out that if you slip a rating point, they slip you.
Yep.
And so he came back, and so he's perfectly happy here. So we've had a core of people who've been here a long time. But essentially, it's particularly in radio, I guess now, it's a business that's populated by gypsies.
Here today, gone tomorrow.
Yeah. And so it reached a point where I never even bothered learning anybody's name. They'd been here a year.
Because chances are they wouldn't be there much longer.
No.
Yeah.
No.
But there were a lot of people that came through KTVQ or Cook Radio, or Cook Television back in those days that were very successful in their careers over the years. Talk about a few of those.
I think the most successful person, one of the most talented people we ever had, was Susie Rosegan, who now calls herself Susan, who went back and ended up as co-anchor of KABC in New York City. Then was with a number of network affiliates, and I think she's down in New Orleans now. But she was a super intelligent thing. In later years, Jake Wittenberg,
yes,
whose dad was publisher of the Gazette. Now he's head of the Historical Society.
Great young talent.
Oh, tremendous young talent. And we've had a gentleman named Weiner, who's with one of the major sports networks now. And it's really refreshing to see these people succeed. You hate to lose them.
Sure.
You really hate to lose talent like that, but you know it's inevitable. And so you just are happy for their success, and have had the opportunity to work with them for a period of time. You say, you know, I wish they'd stuck around a little longer, but
Sure.
I'm glad they made well.
Well, when you're that good, sooner or later the door will open.
Mhm.
Somebody will give you a call, and you're going to get that offer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you stayed in Montana all your broadcast career, and I'm certain that the phone rang on numerous occasions with someone saying, "Mr. Miller, we'd like you to come to Denver or Seattle or New York or wherever."
Mhm.
Why did you stay in Montana?
You reach a point in your career, and I came up through the talent end of it as opposed to the sales end of the business. And you reach a point where you have to make a decision. You're either going to move on to a bigger market and continue to do what you are doing, or you're going to stay here and go into the management end of it. So I was operations director for a number of years, and then general manager for a number of years, because I like going to big cities, but I don't think it's a great place to raise a family.
Any regrets about not taking that job?
No. None whatsoever.
Good. Well, that's one of the reasons why you're a legendary Montana broadcaster. And not everyone sticks it out. A lot of people take that big job into a major market and then return home years later too,
Mm-hmm.
because they want to come back to Montana and they want to be part of the community and be a big fish in a small pond, rather than a small fish in a big pond.
We've had a couple of people who grew up in Billings, who went on and were very successful at the network level. One was Don Oliver, who was NBC's West Coast correspondent for a number of years and died, I think early in 2013. And then, of course, Brent Musburger. And Brent, grew up here and is still on the air.
He won't quit.
No. We were at a broadcasters convention once up in Many Glacier, and I'd arranged at that time, I was president of the broadcasters, and I'd arranged to have Brent come out as one of the main speakers. And so I talked to him on the phone a couple of times, and whether he could make it or not hinged on whether the NBA playoffs ran the full 7 or not. Unfortunately, they didn't. So Brent and his wife Arlene came into the bar where Joanne and I were sitting the night before, and I said, let's invite them over for a drink. And while I talked to him on the phone, I hadn't met him. So I went over and introduced myself, and I said, Brent, I'm Vic Miller. And he looked at me and said, yeah, I know. I used to watch you on television when I was a kid.
And how did that make you feel?
That made me feel old for the first time. But he was a nice guy, and he's always been very gracious when he's been around.
He moved back to Montana, has a place up near Kalispell, I believe. And,
yeah, he's got a place up around Kalispell, and I don't know, he's probably going to go plugging on forever. He's still an excellent sportscaster.
He is, one of the best.
But he said you never know from week to week. You were probably up there, you may have been up there when he was inducted into the Broadcasting Hall of Fame. And he said, you don't know what network you're going to be on or what game you're going to be doing until a few days ahead of time. So you just pack up and you go and you do it.
The world of network television has changed.
It is. I recall he did the Little League World Series a couple of years ago when the Billings team made it, and so they brought him in since he had the Billings background.
Yeah.
And
he knew the color.
Oh boy,
Yeah,
he did great.
Yeah, well, there have been a lot of great people that have come through this state over the years. One that worked for CNN and got several Emmys is Donna Kelly, who's anchor at KBZK in Bozeman, the Cordillera stations. So a lot of great people, I believe, have come through and then come home.
They have. And we've had, over the years, we've had an opportunity to meet and talk to an awful lot of people, including, I've done interviews with the first President Bush, Spiro Agnew, before he was indicted. I would point out there's no connection between those two events. And Ted Kennedy was here.
So you rubbed elbows with the rich and famous.
Oh yes, yes, a little bit.
Was it always a positive experience?
It was, with the exception of the fact, I've done several hundred interviews over the years, and I have never been totally comfortable doing an interview. Whether it was a famous person or whether it was Joe Sixpack off the street, I've always been a little awkward doing an interview, and I don't know why.
And you do such a great job.
Well, thank you very much.
Normally you're in this chair.
Yes, I am. I'd rather be interviewed than interview, quite frankly.
So, of all the people you've interviewed, who was the best person to interview?
It might have been George Bush, because he was perfectly honest. We interviewed him up at the airport. He was here, and at the time, Mike Mansfield was the U.S. ambassador to Japan, and I asked President Bush, he was actually vice president at the time. He was running for president. I said, "If you're elected, will Mike Mansfield still be the ambassador to Japan?" And he said, "Well," he said, "Mike is an outstanding public servant, a great statesman. But of course, the president has the option of appointing anybody he wanted." And I said to myself, "So long, Mike."
Way to dodge the question.
Yeah. But the other thing about it, he still remembered my name after the interview.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Well, so many of them don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they just you're just another face and another microphone, and
yeah.
all of a sudden it's over and you're done.
First interview I ever did, I'd only been in radio a couple of years. Esther Williams came to town.
Famous actress and swimmer.
Famous actress, great swimmer. And she came in and spoke Rotary, and so I went down and interviewed her. Hick kid from White Sulphur Springs, Montana. And I'd seen a lot of her movies. And she was probably in her early 30s at the time. Just a beautiful woman. About 5'10", 5'11", and you know, I'm lucky I didn't swallow my tongue during the interview. But she was very gracious, and it was the first celebrity that I ever had a chance to interview. In radio, the biggest story I ever covered was the earthquake at Hebgen Lake.
Big story.
We flew in there the day afterwards, interviewed survivors at West Yellowstone, and everybody and their dog was trying to get out of there. First time I'd ever seen college students who were scared out of their wits that had been up there. They just couldn't wait to get home. And the airport, they didn't have a control tower. And they had transport planes and a lot of private planes coming in. We went in with a charter flight from Lynch Flying Service, and we got there and the pilot circled and said, "I think I can make it," and he went down. And we interviewed a bunch of people and got back on the plane, and he said, "Looks like there's a hole there," and he took off.
Wow.
But that was probably the biggest story that I ever covered, and that goes back to the radio days.
Huge story. 1958, was it?
Yeah. One of the ironies of it is two of the people that are still buried under tons of rocks up there were from Billings. I didn't know them at the time, but they owned the house that I've owned for the last 40 years.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
what a coincidence.
Made the full circle.
Interesting. One of your favorite people over the years was Senator Mike Mansfield. I had the privilege of doing a radio interview with him at one time. I thought I did a great job. I asked him all the questions, came back, listened to the tape, and he never really answered my questions.
No.
What a great politician.
He was, and he could control the conversation with one word answer. Yep, nope. And it had a tendency to throw you off because you didn't have a chance to formulate your next question. So when Mike would come to town, Joe Sample and I would interview him in tandem.
Tag team.
And we probably did 25 interviews over the years with a good senator.
Some great interviews.
Oh, but you could formulate your your question while he was answering Joe's.
Well,
and so you go bam, 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 bam.
That's a great way to do it.
But I agree with you. And he would answer anything. And it sounded great at the time. And I mentioned this once to a network reporter, that Mike never actually answered a lot of your questions. He said, "Well, he does for me." And I watched this reporter interview Mike, and he was no better at it than I was.
Well, you've once you retired from television, you decided to do a weekly commentary on KTVQ, and you've done that for many years now. And at the end of 2013, you're actually retiring from doing those weekly commentaries. You and your alter ego, Slab Marble.
That's right. There's a time to charge and there's a time to retreat. And I do not want to stick around to the point where I'm mumbling and drooling on my shirt front. And I'll probably miss it, because I've enjoyed it. And the greatest thing about this, in all the years I've done it, no one ever told me not to do one, or nobody criticized me afterwards from the station, including you, and I am very grateful for that. You let me have total freedom when you were general manager to do what I wanted to. The 18 years I was general manager, I had total freedom to do what I wanted to. And I write my own material. If I do borrow something from someone, I credit them with it. But 99
No plagiarism involved?
No plagiarism involved. 99% of the stuff that I have done over the years, I've written myself. Basically, I'm more of a humor writer than anything else, but I can do a hard-nosed commentary if I have to, particularly if it involves politics.
Yep. Well, I remember as general manager, you got a letter one day from a Wyoming viewer. And the letter basically said, every week you bring some humor into my life, and there isn't a great deal of humor in my life. And I always thought that was a great tribute to you and your ability to communicate and to still entertain at the same time.
Thank you. No, that was a gracious letter, and I was very pleased. The other thing, Stan Lyon died not too long ago, and Stan, of course, lived here, and he was involved in the ricochet contest with Western Day parades. And I was talking to Stan one day, and he said, "When I watch you on television, I know you wouldn't lie to me."
Wow.
And that was one of the nicest things that anybody's ever said.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Well, that trust comes with years of experience and years of doing the right thing.
Well, you try to do the best you can. It's like, Walter Cronkite used to end his broadcast, and that's the way it is. And you'd like to think that what you did that's the way it is, not necessarily the last way that I'd like to slant it. And unfortunately, in this day and age, that's not always the case.
Well, Vic, you've got a beautiful wife, Joanne. You've got a couple of grown sons that are fine young men. You've got some grandkids. Any great grandkids yet?
Nope.
They're coming?
Yep. We got two. Our oldest grandson is 20. Our youngest is 3.5.
Wow. Great.
Yeah.
Great spread in ages there.
Right.
Well, we have roughly 30 seconds left here. Any final words, any advice for a young person looking for a career in broadcasting today?
I would say if you can intern to do something like that, make sure it's really what you want to do. It's a great profession if you want to do it, but don't get in thinking it's going to be glamorous as heck, because it's not going to be glamorous as heck.
It's a job.
It's hard work. Yeah.
It's a job. Our guest today, Mr. Vic Miller. Vic, it's been a pleasure and an honor, and we hope to see you soon.
Always great being with you, Monty.
Thank you, sir. This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.